Radio Saturday morning show. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now roll tide.
And Mark Kraynak.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome to it, weekend editions here. It's Hail Varsity. Chris Schmidt, Mark Kraynak, Elijah Herbel, and you. How loud was the scream wherever you were at? Not only that Texas lost, but how Texas lost last night, as it was OHIO on to the championship game against Notre Dame. Dive into some portal thoughts.
Big
for
10.
Nebraska.
Big
That's
10.
fine.
Any of those chants start anywhere?
No.
I didn't
But
think so.
we were at a bar last night after the Southeast high school basketball game, and we're all kind of intently watching as it's first and goal for Texas, first and goal at the 1, and Texas proceeds to lose yards, throwing it and running it, and then here comes old Jack Sawyer of Big Ten Media Day fame with the strip sack, and then let's return it 83 yards.
Did you have that guy on the show?
Ohio State has been very good at
Big time
staying away from Big Ten media radio sessions.
I was going to say giving Schmitty the bird.
Yeah, not just me.
I'm sorry.
I think you should make it personal, bro. I think it is personal.
He just.
I think Ohio State hates you, man.
He just smoked his roommate. It was great because Ewers was his roommate. The semester Ewers was in Columbus before he transferred back to Texas. Ohio State could not have been better when we went to Columbus. They were incredible. So,
And
that's kind of my take.
can I add to this? Why is Ohio State not just running 4 quarterback sneaks from the 1?
I mean, Texas.
Sorry, that's what I mean. Yeah, why is Texas not running just 4 quarterback sneaks from the 1? Like, even if you don't trust Ewers, shift your tight end in and run the quarterback sneak. You're at the 1-yard line. You have 4 tries at it. They're doing this stupid sweep to the outside. I know they didn't have great success running downhill inside, but you need 1 yard.
And you got 4 downs to do it.
Yeah,
Right? Like, that's the thing. It's just,
maybe that's just the Big Ten that is now in my blood, but sneak it 4 times.
Yeah, something.
It's first and goal from the 1. Gibson doesn't get in. Second and goal from the 1, and they go lateral with Wisner, and they lose 7. Now you're screwed from the 8.
Yeah.
Get yourself a freaking Corey Schlesinger and play man ball.
Well, listen, football, it's physicality and it's deception, right? From the 1, it's not about deception at that point, right? Like, you're not trying to like do misdirection and
You're not
trick
trying to
anybody.
trick anybody, huh?
Yeah, you're trying to get
going here.
A yard.
It's going here. Can you stop it?
Well, to be fair, Sawyer talked post-game about how that Ohio State defense prides itself on goal-to-go situations, especially
They better.
1 yard or 2 yards. And we all saw it in Columbus when Dowdell from just outside a yard tries to leave his feet and get stopped up just short. We all saw that, so we know Ohio State's.
Hold on.
That was a little different. That
was idiotic decision making, trying to see if you can fly from the 6.
Okay, I disagree. I disagree in that. Well, Rule talked about it post game. He thought they were closer than they were with the spot. Thought it was a bad. spot.
They got screwed by a half yard.
But how many times?
But you don't go airborne for the love of God.
Dowdell had like 6 touchdowns this season going airborne. They're trying to use his athleticism at the goal line.
What are the two we remember? The one fumble at the goal line and the stoppage against Ohio State. Those are the two.
I just wish the guy would transfer to Kentucky or something. I mean, that was ridiculous. As soon as he left his feet in Columbus, I was like, okay, get in the portal, bro. What is going on?
Kraynak, I've seen enough. Kraynak gets up off his couch, throws his remote at the TV, and just walks out of the room.
I don't
dramatically.
I don't mind jumping or diving.
Yeah.
I do mind when it's from the what was he on, the 3 or something? You're like, no. Chris described it perfectly. He tried to like go Superman.
It's like
dude,
he's
there's
running
gravity.
he's running the triple jump, for the love of God, and there's sand.
I just think with as much as we saw that this season, I don't think that was Dowdell saying, I'm going to go Superman. I think that was probably coaching. I think he was probably coached to do that on that play. And I
To
think
jump from the 7. He was coached to do that.
I love how it keeps getting back further.
Oh, let's not ruin this this urban legend, okay?
Oh, you're standing on the 20. And this dude's trying to hop off a trampoline into the propel himself into the end zone.
Don't ever leave your feet.
So many times.
Don't stick the ball over.
You saw it so many times when Nebraska was a yard away from the goal line, Dowdell going over the top, that I'm pretty sure it was probably coached. And I think, as Matt Rule said after the game, they were just further from the goal line. We're going way too far back to a game in Columbus that is now irrelevant.
No, it's
totally relevant.
It was not coached. It was probably allowed.
It's totally relevant because how many people were watching last night? At least 1, 2. My boy over here.
All 3 of us. All 4 of us.
No, but how many were watching last night being like, Nebraska hung with those dudes? Transitive
Sure.
property? I mean, like the margin, what separates the good teams from the teams in the playoffs and all that, I don't think it's as big as sometimes we make it. You know, it's just not. People are like, Nebraska could have beaten Ohio State that day. Like, just based on what was happening on the field, very reasonable that Nebraska could have beaten Ohio State.
241 to go. You have the ball because you get a stop.
Right?
Yeah, and I don't know. Could have is one category. I haven't found many that say Nebraska should have. Right?
Well, what kind of
could have versus should have.
What stood out to me from last night was the fact that Texas, who has 5 stars all over their defensive front, they got 5 stars in their defensive line. Nebraska hung physically in the trenches with Ohio State just as well as Texas did last night, if not maybe a little bit better. That's one thing that stands out to me. And kind of part of this discussion is just like, as Mark lays out, hey, there is a difference between your teams that are national championship contenders and your teams that are 6-6, 7-5, fighting for a bowl appearance. Nebraska got Ohio State on an off day. Let's be clear. Ohio State came into that game in Columbus, overlooking Nebraska. Ultimate trap game. Penn State was next week for Ohio State, if I remember correctly. Like, they overlooked Nebraska, absolutely. But I think it does underscore the fact that the margins are thin between a team that goes, say, 7-5 or 10-2, 11-1. Those national championship contenders, like, yeah. But to make it into the playoff, the margins between 6-6, 7-5, and being a team that is in contention for a playoff bid in November, very, very thin. When you look at Nebraska's pickups in the portals so far this offseason, is that enough to get Nebraska over the hump, to get them past that margin of bowl team to playoff contender team?
I'm not sure that Nebraska has picked up, by the way. That's a good question about what they've picked up in the transfer portal. How many commits are they up to now at this point? I know they've offered 30 plus.
Is it 16?
16? Are they up to, is it 16? Is it 12?
But it's in the double digits, well into the double digits of number of players that Nebraska's picked up. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't, and maybe this is okay, so this isn't criticism, but I don't know that they've picked up like that dude, like a star. They picked up like a can't miss star. You know, the equivalent of even a Casey Thompson, right? Like, you can even say somebody of his caliber, of his ilk. I don't know that they have, and that's okay, because I don't know if a lot of those guys even enter the transfer portal. But I think you've gotten some solid pieces. I think you've gotten some solid. You have dramatically increased the amount of experience you have on the roster. Like, whatever you've lost to graduation, you've pretty much replenished. It feels like, and I think you've increased some athleticism in some places. But do you have the can't miss guy? Like, you have a lot of potential dudes. Like, think about like Desan McCullough from Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. He looks like he's an AI generated defensive player, right? Like, you're just like, oh my God, the guy could play anywhere from safety to defensive. He's like Randy Gregory in terms of build, right? In terms of just actual build. You play him at defensive end or safety. You have a guy like that, okay. But it's not like his numbers were off the charts and he was amazing and he was
Well, that's
all conference, right? You're just sort of like,
it's the reality of the portal, in my opinion, Mark, in that for most guys in the portal, there's a reason they're in the portal, and only a few of them are like, I'm a star and I want to get paid for my last year of college football. And those guys, let's be honest, how heavily are they considering Nebraska this cycle? Like,
yeah.
If you want to get money and you want to get paid, or sorry, if you want to get paid and you want to go win, is Nebraska the spot for you? I don't know. The thing is like, look at the teams that have done well in the portal, and the Indiana is the poster child from this past season. How many instant stars did Indiana pick up in the transfer?
Great point. Yeah, and so what I'm saying, you might not even need that. I don't know that you need like that dude, from the portal. If you're just sort of increasing the middle, if you're just like elevating the middle of your roster, or just elevating your starters in general, but not necessarily getting a mirror.
I mean,
not necessarily getting the next
Nebraska.
first round.
What Nebraska's doing in the portal is elevating their choices. Do we know that who's back at wide receiver is going to be better than who they brought in at wide receiver? We don't know that, but there's a chance that
Who is back at wide receiver? There's not a lot.
No, I know, but
the most important one, Corey Barney.
Yeah.
Barney's
about it. Otherwise, they looked at their wide receiver room and says, "All right, dude, we need to upgrade here," and they have. I'll say this, and we'll get our starting 5 shout outs in a moment. We'll get to Brandon Vogel here in 2 seconds. I like Groves Killebrew. I like Winery. I like Pritchett. Those are 3 guys that if you can get them to click, I mean, they have all conference potential. Okay. You've got 2 years and for 2 of the 3 at least. And then you have multiple years with Winery. We're talking to Brian Christopherson yesterday, and he made a really good point on Winery with the reality that he was asked to come in and play a brutally difficult position, but it's also a high profile position where the expectation is to come in and be Lawrence Taylor. Well, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in the SEC. It doesn't happen for kids out of high school real often. So I think there's so much upside there if you can tap into Pritchett's ceiling, at tackle. If you can tap into Groves Killebrew as far as how highly ranked he was out of high school, because he's got the physical tools, and you saw a lot out of Sierra Wright, similar situation, right? And then you got Winery. Big thanks to Rick for jumping in early. Charles is here. Uncle Larry checks in. Walter from Philly says horns down forever. Good morning to you. Kobe is here. Kobe, good to have you. Greg, thanks for coming in. Brian is here. Tiger Shark Diver, is in. Patrick, Anonymous, good to be with you. And Tuck is in as well. Robert checks in. Kobe is here. And Mike checks in. Mike, good to have you. Michael is in. More horns down. I love it. It's pretty funny. A lot of horns down this morning, and no one's shedding a tear. Red Wine is here. Don't forget about Dan, or make that Dane Key and Gilmore. They are good ball players. Kobe, I agree with you.
They are.
I like the fact that they're following their coach. Steve is here.
Their numbers, just real quick to interject. I know we're in the middle of starting 55, but
deep bench, your brother.
The numbers that those guys put up, like Dane Key put up, that's, not much more than Nair. I don't think it's about the same. So it's not necessarily star quality numbers. Proven guy, good guy. You want him on your roster. I'm not saying that, but in terms of bona fide star,
not yet.
Well, the thing to me, and we'll get to Brandon Vogel here just momentarily, but like,
hi, Vogues.
Hello.
Do you need, though, and my thought is, in the portal, how realistic is it for you, I guess, to go poach out of the portal a first team all conference type guy? As you look at the teams in the college football playoff, there are some dudes that transferred in. You think of Downs going to Ohio State. That was a really big pickup for them. Like, they're going to have those occasional pieces, but for the most part, the guys you go pick up in the portal are not your first team all conference guys. They're the guys that are going to come in and fill a hole for you. And the first team all conference guys, the guys that you bring into your program and develop from the high school ranks. That's to me what I think the ideal portal method is you're going and filling holes. Like, hey, we didn't see the development that we wanted to see at middle linebacker. So we're going to go in and we're going to find ourselves a solid quality middle linebacker. But the first team all conference guys that you have are the guys that you go get in the recruiting ranks and develop up and have them play for 3 or 4 years. Like, that's kind of my take on what, as it stands right now, the ideal portal method is. And I take that from what I see from most of the college football playoff teams, the exceptions being your Indianas and your Arizona States. But most of their schools developed internally and they filled holes through the transfer portal. And did some of them get star players in those spots? Yes, because they're Ohio State and they're Texas and they're Georgia and whatnot. But most of those schools are developing internally to get their first team all conference guys.
Brandon Vogel with us from Counter Reed, Buck 380, and Sal also in this morning. Black Hills Brennan checks in. Folks, let's go there here. Now, 2 names that I think of from the portal that were, All-American / All-World. Downs from Ohio State. You nailed that, Elijah. He's a difference maker. But also Cam Ward, of course, from Miami at quarterback. And Howard's been a big time addition for Ohio State. But Vogues, what do you want from the portal? Let's open this book up this morning. If you're Nebraska, do you just want options? Do you want obvious upgrades? What is the method to the madness here? Because you got to play the game. You got to protect against your roster. But you also got to add to your roster. And I think we all like the direction Nebraska's gone, especially in the wide receiver room.
Yeah, I think wide receiver room would be probably the biggest win when you look at the group that Nebraska has brought in there. And I think there's a couple of distinctions. You mentioned Cam Ward. Like, quarterbacks are just kind of their own category. Like,
exactly.
That's one where the money is, I mean, everyone just kind of knows and assumes that quarterbacks are worth the most because they are. And that changes things. That one really can operate like free agency for these playoff teams. Ohio State and Texas, like, being kind of prime examples, they're in a really advantageous spot where, they're supremely talented based on their high school recruiting. So yeah, they're going to lose some guys who were 5 stars and 4 stars coming out of high school, but they're often guys who didn't find the field there for whatever reason. And I haven't, ever bothered to track it, but I would be curious, like, how many of those guys end up working out? Like, they were just buried at Ohio State and then they went into Texas Tech and looked like the 5-star they were. I don't recall a ton of them.
Just Joe Burrow to me.
Yeah, that's one. So, I mean, for Ohio State, and obviously Ohio State and Texas are 2 most valuable programs in college football, they're able to be really selective and are a desirable destination for anybody. So Nebraska's at a different level, and Elijah mentioned Indiana. I think Nebraska in the portal, what you're really trying to do, at least the way I look at it, is replace production. When you look at wide receivers, however anyone felt about Banks and Nayor and what they were able to do, for the most part, it wasn't splashy, but I think those guys were slight wins for Nebraska last year.
I like
in the portal.
Banks a lot.
Yeah, and I think they've increased their ceiling there with guys like I like Hunter from Cal a ton.
Yeah,
he's just young, and so you don't have a ton to go on. But a team like Indiana last year, and that's a little bit of a unique circumstance too, but I think 3 of their top 4 receivers were transfers. Their top 2 running backs, their quarterback, and they're stud defensive linemen, who I don't recall. I assume he was first team All Big Ten. And that's the thing for Nebraska. Like when you look at it, Jamari Butler wasn't a first team All Big Ten player, but would he have been in the running if he were still here? He probably would have. So that's kind of the challenge I look for with Nebraska. When you lose some of those guys, are you bringing in guys you think can help replace what they would have produced?
And in most cases, it does seem like the transfer portal is about instant impact. And I think across the board, as you described, with the receivers that are coming in with Isaiah Hunter and Dane Key, presumably they do replace that production pretty easily of Nayor and Banks with the benefit of a sophomore Raiola. I think maybe at one position, it might not be instant, but if you look at when Prince Will went into the portal, he was at the time like the top ranked defensive lineman in the portal. And you replace him with Waneri, who also became probably one of the top ranked guys, if not the top ranked guy in the portal, but he hasn't done it yet. That's maybe the one spot as you look at it. Like, I'm not sure that you have replaced directly the production is along the defensive line. How much of a concern is that in particular? Like, and I know sometimes you can classify them as linebackers, but they played up on the line quite a bit. Nash, Ty, Jamari, Prince Will, all gone. How's Nebraska doing there in particular?
They're not back to even. I would say with the way that I tend to view it, and it was going to be tough. And some of that was, I think, a little bit unique with the defensive coordinator and D line change. But you look at it, and I think when you include the guys who are just, have completed their careers, like 8 out of the top 9 in terms of tackles for loss are going to be gone. And that's one of those things where, like, somebody's going to get those tackles for loss. Are they just going to be what they would have been if you'd had a Butler? But I mean, mostly Butler and Williams as a pass rush specialist. Iman Millen, like, that one was kind of a little bit more of a gray area. So you hope somebody like Nwaneri, looks like that 5-star, that he was coming out. I really like Desan McCullough a lot. I've mentioned that a number of times. So D-line, it's going to be tough for Nebraska, I think, to replace just how much was lost. Because that's a super competitive spot for transfers too, and the money can get, particularly edge rusher, like the money can get pretty high there pretty quickly as well.
One thing I want to say about the Ty and Nash replacement, if there is such thing, I mean, that was years in the making. I mean, I really appreciate the blood, sweat, and tears that both those dudes put in. Nebraska's interior, as we kind of bring it back to Texas not being able to run inside the 5 last night. I mean, Nebraska had guys that wrecked ball games in the instance of Nash and Polar Bear. I should say Polar Bear and Ty Robinson. And that just doesn't happen. You just don't just drop those guys out of the sky. How quickly can a Riley Van Poppel and, Elijah Judy's been in college football a long time. And, who else can man that interior? Because if you have it this season for Nebraska, if you're almost as good, then I think you got something going. Because that's a big concern for me. I think Nebraska will be better running the football. I think Nebraska will be better throwing the football and catching the football and probably protecting the football. But what's Nebraska's up the middle like? I like Shavers. I like that Buddha's coming back. But what do you got in that A gap for me here against some teams that want to run it, Vogues?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to be better than Nebraska was this year with, as you mentioned, Chris, I think is a key point, like the 4 to 5 years of development that it took Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmacher to be guys like that. And, and we saw, like, I think the potential in 2023, their first year with Tony White and this coaching staff, and then 2024, like this is how you always hope it goes, but it felt like another step forward from that.
Yeah.
I like Riley Van Poppel a lot. Like from what we've seen of him in some limited opportunities, like I think by the time his career is 4 or 5 years in, he's that type of player. And Elijah Judy is a key one as well. Veteran guy who's showed some good things. Now you're 1A or 1B. Probably on the interior there. So we'll see. That's a spot where, as we mentioned, in the portal, it's going to be tough, or there's going to be competition for virtually anyone that's out there. It's one of those kind of developmental places where I think you hope you can kind of just keep the train moving, but occasionally you're going to run into scenarios where you're losing 2 super seniors and your next wave might be a little bit younger.
Brandon, I think Mark kind of said it well in that one of the things you're looking for from the portal, one of the main things is instant impact. Steve says he doesn't think you can assume that all the portal players will start. That's fair. I want to get your thoughts on what a healthy hit rate is in the portal in terms of guys that come in and in year one provide an instant impact. Is it 50%? Is that too much to ask for with the guys that Nebraska has gone after and gotten in the portal so far this offseason?
Yeah, I would guess that's about right. That's kind of, I think, what about the hit rate is in recruiting. So I think it would be safe to start there under the assumption that transfers would be about the same. And, in some cases, I think wide receiver, it doesn't really matter who gets listed as a starter in the game, in the official game book, because you're going to play a bunch of guys. But it's also one where it's like the job's pretty straightforward and you know what you're bringing a guy in to do. So I would agree. Like you don't assume all of these guys are starters. I think when I look at Nebraska's additions so far, I'd probably, stop about halfway and be like, oh, I could see those guys starting. And then the other ones are a little bit more depth or developmental plays, which you've got to do a little bit. I think when I think of the portal for Nebraska, that's probably the more sparing part to use. Like I do think you're trying to plug immediate needs more so than building depth. And I think that's probably Rule's preference based on things that he said, because in terms of depth, at that point, you're bringing somebody in to take a spot from somebody who's kind of gone through the process for 2, sometimes 3 years. And that's one where I'd rather keep the investment with the people you've already invested in.
Would you say Nebraska's at a net plus right now in the portal? Loaded question, because I do want to mention where some guys have gone, right? Stephon Thompson, Florida State. Prince Will, Ole Miss. Jamari, LSU. Danny Kalen, Virginia. Mikey Bayer, Missouri. James Williams, Florida State. You got guys go to UConn, Borkature to A&M, Dowdell to Kentucky. It feels like net, Nebraska is losing guys to the Power Four and bringing in a few Power Four, but mainly bringing in guys from non-Power Four or lower level and altogether. But I don't know if that's necessarily bad. It's just an interesting observation that it seems like a lot of Nebraska's guys, not all, are going to sort of comparable programs success-wise, if not better ones. Whereas Nebraska's drawing from sort of buy game type rosters.
Yeah. No, I don't think they're a net positive based on what we've seen so far. And I'm not sure they can be with, not just this window, but the window to come with just the numbers. Like, I don't know what it's like for some of these guys. They're, at the top of the list. Nebraska didn't want to lose Jamari Butler, but they know the numbers got to come down and come down pretty significantly. So, in certain cases, are they like, well, if a guy decides he's got a better offer and he's going to go, like, for the most part, or we say, hey, thanks for all the hard work and good luck to you, because they need the number to come down eventually. So for that reason, I think it's going to be hard for us to get to August and be like, well, Nebraska sure lost a lot in the portal to a bunch of SEC, ACC schools in certain cases, but they came out ahead. I don't think that's going to be where we're at getting close to kickoff. And that's, I think, just the reality of the situation. So it's going to be about how well they've been able to develop the high school recruits that they've signed over 3 years.
I'm going to say this out loud. I just wonder how the impact goes initially. I mean, what's the instant impact initially for the departed? What does James Williams do next season at Florida State? What does Jamari Butler do next year at LSU? What does Borkacher do at A&M? I'm sure I'm missing Prince Will. Does he go kill it on 3rd and 8 down at Ole Miss? I hope they all do well. I hope they go have great careers and wonderful paydays. But they left positions here that where they were the guy, or they were on the verge of being the guy.
Mm-hmm.
So how crowded are the rooms they went into? I'm just fascinated to see their contribution to these squads, because Ole Miss is demanding playoff with what they spend. LSU, it's like, who the hell's this Brian Kelly guy? They're kind of reassessing things because the new guy at Notre Dame didn't bat an eye and got him to a playoff. Let's talk about that for a moment, folks, with Nebraska. And Mr. Snitley talks a little bit here about Stephon Thompson when it comes to his production, and then you have Marquise Watson Trent, your Sunbelt Defensive Player of the Year. Snitley in the stream here says, you know what, that's an upgrade he'll take. And I think Watson Trent, hell yeah, I think he could be really big time. I love Nebraska going younger. Younger's not the term. Going lower level, a la Indiana. I love that route. I love this Samari Toure option over a guy that comes from a Bama and Oregon that kind of does some things or teases you and then is off to the portal later. So give me the lower level. What about playoffs, though? What about Nebraska's contention here in a year 3? Because that's something we kind of kicked around this week. You know, I think the expectation for Rule and the squad is to be battling and in that conversation in November. Is it too soon for it, or no, because of this portal era for Nebraska?
No, I don't think it's. I mean, when I try to project what Nebraska's team will be when they start fall camp, like, I wouldn't make them a favorite in the Big Ten to get there. But realistically, you're looking at, can you be among the top 4 teams in the league, and be among that group, say at the end of October, and have your November to go out and prove it. There probably would have been about 6 or 7 teams that were in that discussion realistically. Like, and we all knew where Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, and Oregon sat at that point, and those ended up being the 4 playoff teams. But end of the year, Illinois was probably pretty close. You know, could Nebraska do what Illinois did, and at least be? I mean, Illinois was never really in the like playoff discussion, but when you look at the Big Ten, they're one of the 4, 5, 6 best
Number
teams.
5.
Yeah, that's where I would have them. Minnesota with another, you know, it beat North Carolina, which, like, it beat North Carolina. It just didn't win the game in that season opener. They were really close to being among that group. So yeah, I think you can get there. You know, I heard you guys talking at the top of the show about the margin between the playoff teams and those that are kind of on the cusp not being that big, and I would agree with that. I mean, I think we'll see if it continues, but things are just a little bit more volatile in a 12-team era, but also a transfer portal and NIL era. Like Ohio State and Texas, or schools like that, Georgia, still have a talent edge on everyone, but you just got to beat them once, in some cases once, or a team like that once or twice, and all of a sudden you're there, and you get into the playoff and you get a chance to go on a run a little bit.
I just wonder what the number looks like a year from now. Is Nebraska a team that could beat an Arizona State or an Iowa State, two teams that were in contention and one team that gave her hell in the playoff? You look at a BYU that finished 11-2 and went to an Alamo Bowl and kind of lost their opportunity to get into the playoff, but they were in the chase most of the season. They'll end up in the top 10 and you finish 11-2, but you weren't in the arena, so to speak, with the playoff, right? You just didn't get it done in your conference chase. And then a 10-3 season like Illinois, where you're in a bowl game, you took on another good team in South Carolina. I mean, there are different off ramps for Nebraska to go if you don't get into the playoff, but you just want to see if you're a Nebraska fan, a major jump, because I mean, your time is ticking with this quarterback. You've revamped your staff. You're going to have 3 new coordinators, and you're going real heavy. You're going real heavy with some skill talent, and you're trying to upgrade your offensive line. So I'm excited for it. I want it to get here. I'm really excited for it.
The urgency is certainly there in year 3. Like if we get to the end of next October and you have to squint to see Nebraska in the playoff discussion, like I don't. That's not where you want to be. I'm not sure what this means yet. But it's interesting to me that the 2 teams that are left, Notre Dame and Ohio State, are probably 2 teams who have been the most decimated on the offensive line. And that's kind of long been the thing of like, you got to be good up front. So I don't know if it's is sort of an indication of the importance of depth or what it means. But I mean, Texas like moved that the Ohio State offensive line all night, and they've had problems all year. Yet here they are. Those are the last 2 teams standing, Notre Dame and Ohio State.
Not to look too far ahead, but as you look at Notre Dame, Ohio State, I was texting with Schmidt last night. Ohio State's a pretty solid favorite. I think what I'll say about Notre Dame, though, is they feel complete to me. Complete might not be the word, but they don't have any glaring holes. Like everywhere you look, they're solid. They have some exceptional players. But for the most part, like Ohio State seems to have the talent edge. Notre Dame feels more complete. What's your take, though, on the college football playoff championship game? As you look at Notre Dame, Ohio State, I think Ohio State is rightfully the favorite, but I don't think you should overlook Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I thought this going into the Texas game too, with where that number was at. Like Ohio State was a deserving favorite there, but I felt like they were getting a lot of credit for that win over Tennessee and then beating Oregon, which were both impressive. But if you'd made those lines prior to the start of the playoff, they probably would have been 2-3 points lower. It's still favoring Ohio State. So I think there's that piece of it. This Notre Dame team just seems to have something. 9.5. So that's definitely higher than where I would think that would be in terms of an Ohio State Notre Dame line. So it's tough to go against Ohio State to some degree. I think I was really impressed with what Texas did last night. And sure, they lost by 14, and even if that last touchdown hadn't been an 83-yard like miracle play that you see once a season, they would have lost probably by a touchdown, which would have been right where the number was at. But Texas was in that more than I expected. So to some degree, I think Ohio State may have gotten its close call. So I could see the potential for them to win against Notre Dame going away a little bit more. But yeah, I wouldn't rule the Irish out by any means. Been really, really impressed with the team. To your point about completeness, I think, Elijah, the team that Marcus Freeman has built. It's not the collection of talent at Ohio State, but they are very good.
And to do it, I mean, what you just mentioned, like we just sort of gloss over it, and now try to project Nebraska into this, beating Oregon, Tennessee, and Texas back to back to back at the end of the year. Like, you better have some freaking depth, like that is like, and maybe that is kind of the separator at this point, as you look at sort of maybe the starting 11s versus starting 11s could be, within a whisker of each other in terms of ability wise. But I mean, come on, like if you think about project Nebraska, last roster or this upcoming one, is it a roster capable of that?
We don't know. We don't know if Nebraska has a Judkins or Travion Henderson on it for next year. We don't know if
I'll put money on that.
We don't know if Nebraska's got a Buka or a Carnell Tate or a ho-hum, a Jeremiah Smith that was held to one catch for 3 yards. Is there a Jack Sawyer on the roster, right? I mean, you hope if you're a Nebraska fan, but are you seeing it? Because those are the dudes you need to go through that playoff run. And you got a Will Howard that is mistake prone. You batted him around in Columbus into October. I mean, to me, the Achilles heel for this championship game is going to be your quarterback play between both of them.
Yeah, it strikes me as, a pretty even matchup between Leonard and Howard. But the depth piece of it, I'll say this: I think Rule and his staff have kind of built Nebraska that way, where it's not we got our best 14 guys on both sides, and that's who plays. Like, they have shuttled guys in and out. And yeah, I mean, when you look at it, Ohio State and Notre Dame are going to play another third of a regular season, and do it over the course of 6-7 weeks. It's it's an endurance challenge to which we could have foreseen, but now, like, watching it actually play out, it really kind of hits you in the face of how difficult this is.
Well, it's awesome. Vogues, talk to me here. What's happening with Counter Read? How can folks get on board?
Yep, head to counterread.com. I just put up a new free newsletter, so anybody can check that one out this morning. And we'll have some more stuff coming next week, of course, from myself and Aaron Sorensen, twice weekly newsletter for paying subscribers. And you can get a free trial for 7 days if you go over there and sign up and check out everything we've done so far.
Brandon Vogel with us from Counter Read, counterread.com. Vogues, we appreciate you, man. Enjoy the football weekend. Thanks for the time.
Have a good one, guys.
See you, bud. There he is. Roger is asking the all-important question of the Iron Horse. What is the thermostat?
He's at home. He's at home.
I know.
I'm at home.
So we only play the thermostat game on the road. Okay. That's fine.
Yeah, because at home I keep it at a comfy 70.
That's a good call.
But when I'm on the road, it better hit at least 8.
I don't blame you.
Like last weekend was I out of town last weekend? Yeah, last weekend was like
North Dakota, weren't you?
Yeah, it was like 82, 81,
Love
82. It was nice and comfy. You guys don't understand. You got to come spend a night with me.
Oh,
on the road in a hotel.
Yeah.
East of Omaha.
There'll be duck butter aplenty. I'm good. We don't need that.
Not sure what that is.
You don't know what duck butter is?
Hey, great question. Great question for Brandon. And Brandon's newsletter this morning is about the playoff makeup. Okay, so watching the 4 teams that played the last 2 nights and now the 2 that are playing, you could probably make me a short list and a long list, Notre Dame to Ohio State, of guys that scare you. Like, if you were in the coaching chair and you had a scheme against them to stop them, how many guys on Nebraska's current roster do you think scare other teams when they go to put together a game plan against Nebraska?
Raiola slightly. He doesn't full on like scare you, but
there's potential. It's growing.
It's you're a little creeped out by it, but you're not shaking in your boots. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is you get to that. Yeah, you get to that point where you have more than Ty Robinson. You have like multiple guys on both sides of the ball where when the opposing coordinators flip on the film, they go, oh, that guy's a problem. He's going to take a lot of our time this week.
Well,
And that's what you have with you. Like, look at Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State has been the best team in college football. And they're on a heater. And they had one hiccup that if they win the national championship here in a week and a couple of days, they should send all of the love to Michigan, because Michigan taught them who they weren't, what they can't do when they are stressed in a game, or it's just a Michigan thing.
Garrett, let me
It's
ask
crazy
you,
how narratives change, man.
to get back to your point from just a minute ago, though, we talked to Searles, this was a couple years ago now on the show, and he talked about the importance of having a game wrecker on each side of the ball, which is just, as you kind of mentioned it, the guy that you flip on the film and the coordinator has to circle and say, if we don't take care of this guy, we will lose. Where do you think Nebraska needs to have a game wrecker? If there's a game wrecker on each side of the football, I think you can circle quarterback offensively, and yeah, it's an obvious spot where it's nice to have a game wrecker, but elsewhere, where do you look for game wreckers where it's important to have one?
Man, I like linebackers, but man, I still keep going back to having just a dominating middle of the field controlling safety. You know, like, or a defensive back. Like Caleb Downs is a difference maker.
Awesome. He is
like
awesome.
he changes the course. You know, when Texas was down before the sack and the scoop and score, you know, look at what Caleb Downs made on a play on a toss play to the left side. I mean, his speed got there. He didn't make the tackle, but he slowed the running back and allowed his mates to come over. That's where I would want. I'm still, you know, I think of some of Nebraska's better defenses. They always had like a guy in the back that was the general, even though he was on the back end. Yeah, like he was on the back end.
Mike Brown, Mike Minner, that guy.
Yeah, you were afraid to go back there. I mean, Haig, he would be a guy. Toby Wright. I mean, guys that just you were afraid to go over the middle, or you knew that if you made a mistake down the field, that guy was going to be somewhere.
A versatile secondary piece that is physical is like DeJon Gomes. God, he's perfect. He's probably my favorite unheralded player of all time.
He was such a turnover maker.
Such a good fit for what they were doing.
So stick with that, guys, because you look at Nebraska, what they've done with the defensive back room in the portal, and what they've done over the last couple of years. I mean, Nebraska only has defensive backs and wide receivers on the roster. It's going to be really hard to block Cincinnati at Arrowhead in August because all they have is wide receivers and defensive backs. But the amount of defensive backs they have, I think it's going to be fantastic in spring. I think it's going to be Survivor Island. I think guys that just showed up are going to have to prove that they belong here, or they might be out the door. I
what
truly
you're talking
believe
about, Gary, what you're talking about is I think the latest count at defensive back for Nebraska on the roster, which will not continue, is 30 or north of that. It's like
and they have
literally like 30 guys,
and they have some walk-ons in there.
5 starting spots.
Yeah. And so I think spring football at that position is going to be fantastic because you have a brand new coach, but you have a defensive back or a defensive coordinator who spent an entire season with those guys. So he knows their strengths and weaknesses. And kind of if you look at where they're directing some of their portal activity, you know, people forget way back when Nebraska got a safety from Georgia when this first started in the portal in Rhett.
Yeah.
Then they have essentially 3 other cornerbacks, but I think Killebrew is going to be a versatile guy. I think he'd play nickel. I think he'd play safety. I think he'd play outside cornerback. But I think the defensive back room, it's Survivor Island. And I don't care if you're here for only one semester, you better prove your worth, or I think this is a staff that will say, yeah, you know what? We can't carry this many. We're going to take the guys that have proven to us that they can help us win when we get to Saturday. I like what they've done with the defensive back room because they've created competition from young guys that are trying to move up and some of the older guys that are a little bit long in the tooth and have played a lot of football here that are going to have a hell of a performance in the spring on and off the field to keep their jobs. I love it.
One of the things I noticed, Gary, this is either Thursday or yesterday, I can't remember which day, but have you noticed that all of Nebraska's portal pickups in the defensive back room stand taller than 6 feet?
Yeah,
that's one thing I noticed. Is there a stylistic shift coming to that defensive back room with how John Butler wants his DBs to play?
Yeah, I think, you know, you look at like a guy like Singleton or like Hartzog. Hartzog's a little guy. He's under 6 foot. I think it's kind of a shift. And I'll throw another one in here, Elijah. You're absolutely right. I love that observation, is they're getting bigger and longer and taller, especially cornerbacks, but also I think Holgerson's in love with big-bodied wide receivers.
Mhm.
So maybe the physicality part of it, they realize in the Big Ten, they need to have an advantage there on wide receivers that can beat man coverage. And then on the other end, cornerbacks that can apply pressure in man pressure.
I think Hartzog has to be in a very particular kind of defense. I think if you're running a lot of man, probably not. I think if you're running some almost like if a basketball equivalent of like get that guy as the box and one chaser, right?
Yeah.
Like let him play a little free, let him roam to where he's not responsible for any one thing, but he can come clean things up and he can make plays. That's just a lot of stuff to line up for him, though, that I don't think they necessarily will. But there is something to be said, too, for him being one of those guys that ever since he walked on campus, different coaching staffs have all elevated him to that spot, right? Like he has leapfrogged everybody else. He earned one of the low digit numbers, right? So he's a guy you can't count out, but you can't ignore the liability he is, I guess, in certain man-to-man situations. But you also have to give him credit for the fact that as injuries occur, Hartzog can do it. So there's something to be said for that too, as a guy that you can just freaking move around and he can hold his own.
Yeah.
He's not right. He's not necessarily going to like be a difference maker, but he can plug the hole.
He's got a ton of heart, and you love the effort. And I know who every defense was going after on 3rd and 9.
Yep. Him and Buford.
For sure.
Can you hide
And
it?
it sucked. It sucked for him.
But what can you do schematically, though, to not get him in that spot?
Well, I think Buford, you
go
move
get the quarterback.
Yeah, I think that would be a big part of it. And so you look at, I mean, they're trying to load up on pass rushers, but I also think like Buford's situation, they're going to move him back to his more natural position. So I think he'll be good there. Hartzog, like Malcolm is, and Schmidt, you're right. He's a very charismatic guy. He wants to be one of us. He's a broadcasting major.
He's not a corner.
He rides the wave. Like he'll make a play and you go, yeah, you know what? I saw that when he was a freshman here. And then there'll be 2 or 3 plays and you're like, wow, they must go up to the line of scrimmage and go, where is number 7? So can they hide him, or can they lessen his role where they put him in situations where he can win those downs?
Yeah.
Like, would he be better with less snaps? And I'm talking really, really good with less snaps, and snaps that play right into what his coverage skills are.
When you're bringing plus pressure, maybe he's the guy that's coming off the edge, right?
You don't want to leave him on an island.
When you're in dime,
been left on a lot of islands. I mean, the guy's
but when you're in dime, right, and you got 6 defensive backs, could he be that guy that isn't responsible for a specific man? Like, because if you look at the stuff that he gave up, and this is me as a former junior varsity corner, all right, in the high school ranks, so
you played.
I can relate with the guy. But truthfully, a lot of the things that he gave up were to just sheer physical mismatches. I mean, 6'4" wide receivers when he's 5'9". It's like schematically, you can't get him lined up like that. Like, I'm sorry.
Back to Elijah's point. Back to Elijah's point. I think Butler in his first year in the Big Ten saw that, knows what the wide receiver talent is in this league, and has said, we can't have a 5'9", 5'10" guy playing cornerback. We just can't. No. I don't care if he has a huge heart. There's going to be more times where he's not going to win that 50-50 ball, or he's just going to get beat off the line of scrimmage because he is overpowered because of the size difference.
Yeah, he is a middle of the field plus defender. Don't have him line up man to man so he can't get isolated.
But he would be a guy. He would be a guy that, hey, it's competition, man, in the spring. I mean, I'm prepared to say, and
he's a willing hitter too in the secondary. That matters. Mm-hmm.
I'm prepared that there may be some guys that we've seen play a lot of football won't play as much, or maybe realize after the spring that they're not going to be able to beat out other guys and it's time to move on. I mean, I think it's great. A new position coach, defensive coordinator who coached those guys. You got an abundance of them. They all know in that room that there's not enough chairs for him. And so the best are going to play. And I think at the end of the day, that'll make that room so much better. You know, I'm a firm believer. Matt Rule got a gift going down to 105 for a lot of things on and off the field, the culture part of it where it's a lot tighter and you can't hide guys. I mean, guys get exposed when you're on a 105 compared to a 150.
I was a 4.7 handheld, so I don't want to hear
Love
that.
it.
Walter.
I love it. No,
Handheld, which means I was probably a 5'1", you know.
Then did you run the next 20?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't say 40-yard, did I? It was 40 feet.
Juan chimes in here. Here's a name that we were really smiling about in the Pinstripe Bowl. Go ahead, Elijah.
And I think this also underscores Nebraska wanting to move to some taller defensive backs.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, Donovan, fantastic.
And for the podcast listeners that aren't watching, we're talking Donovan Jones, that comment in from Juan Camacho.
He came in and played his ass off. And Sharpie, you've seen a lot of years of Donovan at North, and a guy that just kind of kept on grinding. I mean, he's a good story for this Nebraska secondary, and it's nice that got noticed. I mean, the work put in earned that field time, and then he made a difference.
Yeah, you know, so I'm going to tell you this. Keep an eye on his brother. So his brother just finished his junior year at North. His brother's a pretty good player, and he's a little bit bigger than Donovan. You know, Donovan violated a past rule at Nebraska where they were just on measurables, and the only way he got his scholarship offer is he came to Lincoln to work out. And I think they were smart enough to go, that guy's a football player. I think that's the shift with Nebraska. You know, Scott's staff, and John Bullock is a prime example. I do a lot of high school football in Omaha, so I saw John Bullock when he was in high school at prep. And I always said to John Schreiner, who you guys know, why does Nebraska not offer him? The kid can play football. And they were always measurables. And John said Nebraska told him he had to run a specific number in the 40 to get a scholarship. Well, we know he walked on. That guy's just a football player. Like Donovan Jones, probably initially you go, okay, there's something there. But then if you watch him in person, you're like, that's a football player. The most amazing thing about Donovan is, you know, he redshirted this year, didn't play a ton. He played half the game at cornerback in the Pinstripe Bowl. That was essentially like coming off.
It looks like he belonged.
Yeah, he played the most snaps he'd played since he was a senior in high school. And you're right, Mark. He did not. Him and Caleb Benning did not look out of place in the back end. And those guys hadn't played all year because the plan was to redshirt him. I'm very excited about him. But think about this at that particular position. We're all in agreement that Sierra Wright's going to be one of the starting cornerbacks, correct?
Yep. Sure.
Who's this? Who? What?
Sierra Wright.
Oh yeah. So there's
okay. So the opposite
four spots.
You got three spots.
Yeah, but let's say the opposite one. There is Donovan Jones. We can rattle off a couple others. Do we bring Bly Hill back into the mix?
Maybe.
Because he was after spring, before he suffered the injury in the spring game, we were like, man, I think Bly Hill's going to be a starting corner.
He's got a lot of length, right? He's you talk about if Butler likes size, that's about the biggest corner that you're going to get. I think he goes 6'3", if I'm not mistaken, if not bigger. I don't want to turn this into the Malcolm Hartzog defender show. But I for one do not appreciate and subscribe to how much crap he gets when that's the dude. Like, he just finished his third year, and he has in all 3 years with different defensive back coaches played every single position in the secondary, been called into. He has been asked to figure out all the positions at any given moment. He's done it while he's even been injured. I just feel like he's sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of the secondary, where it's just like, listen, this dude has given you he honestly
reference,
but honestly, there's a reason why. I mean, you only have 5 defensive backs on the field. How come the coaches keep elevating him to fill one of those spots?
Because of what he does.
Because he's the best. Well, he's the best option they got, right? And he's versatile enough and selfless enough and team player enough to do whatever and not bitch about it. And so I think guys like that need to get a little bit of respect. And it's not like he gets toasted. It's not like he busts and somebody's 5 yards. He's usually draped all over the receiver that
he gets
inches
beat
on him.
He gets beat, and a guy makes a play on him.
He's like within a fingertip of tipping a ball. Like think about USC, right?
Yeah,
it's just so. I just
that
don't
was a
like
big.
people,
There were 2 in that game,
but I just don't like people pooping on him for it when he's the guy that's like it's not out. You think of some past corners that Nebraska had, including the quote unquote first rounder this year that got hurt and ended up on the bench at the end of the year. In terms of like being a willing hitter and all that, he's not that guy. He's not the guy that's like scared to light somebody up. He's not scared to hit and run support. And Nebraska's played guys like that. Again, I'm not trying to turn it into the Malcolm Hartzog apology show. I'm not saying he's going to be an NFL draft pick or anything like that. But I think he has value.
The loudest cheer in the state of Nebraska during the Ohio State game was Hartzog's kick-ass interception. That brought the ball down to the 4-yard line. Did Nebraska score on that drive? I don't remember. It's a blur.
No, but this dude has. I'm just saying he has.
That was the Dowdell drive, wasn't it?
Yeah. He has a lot of value. Do you put it this way? Do you remember? You remember when Hill went out against? Oh, who was it?
Illinois.
Was it Illinois? And they bring in Jeremiah
Charles.
They play him for 2 series, and they quickly figure out. We
got
Hartzog. We thought Hartzog wasn't ready. No, right? Yeah. Like that was your other option.
To Malcolm's. So Malcolm is on. Malcolm is on to his 4th defensive coordinator and 3rd defensive back. Because remember, his freshman year was frosty year,
and they've all loved him.
Back to a previous comment you made. I would go Rodney Dangerfield, best movies, Easy Money, Caddyshack, Back to School.
I have not seen Easy Money, but
I haven't either.
Back to School is I loved it growing up. It was it was dubbed, and we threw caution to the wind with the FBI warning.
Without Bubbles. Hey, Bubbles, come in. Right.
I just love the interaction with Sam Kennison and Rodney Dangerfield, the bat bleep history professor.
Yeah.
Push them back to the Great Wall of China.
I saw Sam Kennison in concert in Omaha.
Funny Bone,
like 7th grade.
Was he at the Funny Bone?
No, it was Civic, if I'm not mistaken.
Really?
Civic, or no, it could have been.
Because he used to.
In 7th grade, so you kind of don't know where the hell you are, right?
You had the best parents, Kraynak. You're a 7th
It wasn't my
grader,
folks. It was my friends' folks that took me.
I love that.
He loved them. He said like towards the end of his life, he was doing an interview, and someone talked about like where he got to start, some of his favorite places. He loved like the Funny Bone in Omaha. I think that was one of the first places he did.
The Funny Bone in Omaha, this is turning into a free shout out now, but it's actually super well respected among comedy scenes. A lot of comedy people like to start and finish their tours in Omaha because how well they get treated at the Funny Bone in Omaha. So that's a total free shout out to them. Love that spot. Great place to go check out some comedy because they run it right, and the comedians all love the management at the Funny Bone in Omaha. So
the only thing I remember about his act on that one, I'm not going to do it justice, but it was something along the lines of, you always see these TV commercials of needing to provide relief for people that live in the desert where the food doesn't grow. Why don't you move away from the desert? No food. And he's just screaming, and you're just like, yeah, it's a fair point. You might want to move away from the desert.
He had a take on the old portion of the world that is dealing with famine.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
He wanted them to move.
Yeah, he goes, it occurred to me that there wouldn't be world hunger if people would move where the food is.
Right. Yes.
But if you think about it,
end world hunger, eat a sandwich, right?
So to relate it, there wouldn't be 3rd and 8 conversions if Nebraska would defend where the 6'2" wide receiver is.
Oh, you went. Hey, question you asked earlier. I just want to bring it back. Is like, where do you want this, like an impact guy on offense or defense? It'll be a little controversial here, but after watching Tyler Warren's act, and after seeing, rewind a few years back with twin tight ends that the Patriots had. Give me a tight end that is just impossible to cover because they attract so much attention. They free up stuff on the outside so much. I would love to see that. Give me a dude, a tight end capable of 60 catches, 700 plus yards, 10 touchdowns, because it just screws up the entire middle of your defense. It screws you up.
Well,
You get mismatches all day.
You got to
give me that.
You go out of your way to recruit them.
And I think they're hard. I think they're harder to take away than a receiver that's kind of out of this world. I think a top flight tight end, you're going to have a lot of trouble taking that guy out of the picture.
Who do you have on
receiver?
your defense?
I think there's some things you can do to limit them.
Who do you have on your defense that can guard Warren? You guard him with a linebacker. You guard him with a safety.
No one in college. That's kind of my point.
No, I know.
Yeah.
So go to
no one in college football that can.
You guard him with Deshaun McCullough.
Right. McCullough is your answer. Simmons from Clemson back in the day was your answer, your hybrid guy.
So we're going to crown this guy. We're going to crown McCullough now.
He's got the athletic.
17 tackles last year. 17.
He missed the first 6 games of the year, to be fair, and then didn't really get his starting job back. But the year before was really good at Oklahoma, and was really good his true freshman season at Indiana. So
versatile piece.
Whoever it is, you need linebackers that can cover in space because the tight end isn't going away in the Big Ten. There's a lot of good tight end schools.
You know, one reason why he might be going too is because Oklahoma has Boganowski, who is kind of like him. And could be a safety or a linebacker or a freak athlete that can kind of play all the positions. And I wonder if that's part of why he left. Because
one of the things you have to look at, though, is
Boganowski, son of a former Bellevue West player that played at New Mexico State, Mike Boganowski.
One of the things you do have to evaluate with the portal, though, is which schools are upset that a player has left, and Oklahoma was upset that McCullough had left.
Yeah.
Versus saying thank you for taking this guy.
Well, he's a 1 in a million in terms of just physical build, right? Like there's not a lot of human beings walking around like that guy.
Yeah. Sharpie, I want to ask you before we get you out, Gary Sharp with us, weekend edition, Hail Varsity.
Before we get you out.
You look at Penn State.
I'm going to get some coffee and pull up a chair. Hold on.
One more thing. You look at Nebraska. You look at where Penn State's at. You look at Ohio State. You look at this playoff platform here. All right. Where's Nebraska at in your eyes? How close are they? Well, how far?
No, I don't think they're a far way away. First, your baseline is you start in the Big Ten. So you have that built-in advantage if you are one of the top 4 teams in the Big Ten. The magic number, I think on a previous podcast, we all kind of agreed is 10. Get to 10 in the Big Ten. Your season is continuing in December in a playoff. Here's, the talent part has to improve. You have to have solid depth. I know you guys were talking with Brandon. I think that's a great point. If you look at right now, Notre Dame has had some injuries. All 4 teams have had some injuries of sometimes significant guys during this road in the playoffs. You have to have depth. And it's not just, hey, we have another body. You have to be able to turn it over. Like you go from a 5-star outside linebacker to a 4-star outside linebacker that's his backup. So I think depth is pretty important. I will tell you one thing that watching the playoff that I really think Nebraska has to change. I think Nebraska has to get faster and stronger.
Okay.
I think what has happened with strength and conditioning at Nebraska is guys are happy that their bodies look different. They look better, man, in the mirror. Okay, because they've cut weight off of them. They have fixed their bodies. But Nebraska needs to get stronger and faster. That's my takeaway watching the last 2 nights of football. There's a ton of speed. There's a ton of physicality. Nebraska has bodies that look good. Nebraska needs to have bodies that are strong, that are faster. And they will be faster on defense. So that will, that'll impact how you look at this season. But I think you have to start there. And then you have to have certain areas where you got to have dudes. Man, you got to have some fellas that when it's go time, they make plays. They're cut stoppers. When you say, all right, tight game, who's going to make a play? Where's my Jack Sawyer?
Let's go back.
And then another part, you got You gotta have home run hitters in all three phases: offense, defense, and then special teams has to be on point.
I lose my mind when I think about special teams and the kind of the philosophy and the approach that goes all the way back to Callahan, and thank God Bo interrupted it, but then Riley continued it, Frost continued it, of just freaking mailing it in on any kind of return. I'm just like, oh my goodness gracious. It's just,
so you want a little tidbit here?
To concede that much of a football game is atrocious to me. I can't.
So a little
understand
tidbit
it.
here. One of the talking points about Nebraska's special teams across the Big Ten is teams that were playing Nebraska, when they would look at their coverage schemes, there was nothing that was different that they had never seen. And there was what was I told that a Big Ten coach told a Nebraska coach? Oh, kickoff coverage, definitely punt block, and punt return. Those were three glaring areas that when they flipped on the film to scheme against Nebraska on their special teams, they saw nothing different. Nothing
innovative, nothing.
Just simple, hey, we don't really have to, this is what they do, and they're not going to change it. But you also have to have the players that are in place to fix that. But as you rolled your eyes, Mark, about special teams, and we all did this past year, it was GD atrocious. Isn't Nebraska building back special teams through the portal? Not just a long snapper and punter, but I look like, Jonah Wilson is rumored to be about to commit to Nebraska, the wide receiver from Houston. He looks like a special teams guy. Marshall looks like a returner. It looks like they're trying to fix some of their special teams issues through guys they're adding in the portal, where in their last stop, they were pretty important guys on particular special teams. Just my observation.
I agree.
Concede. He can't concede that part.
And that's what they're doing. And I hear you, Gary. I feel like Nebraska has brought in specialists with accolades, but for whatever reason, they just don't use them. Right? I mean,
true.
Hartzog, that was a guy who was a really good special teams guy. Returned like 6-7 punts, kicks or whatever for a touchdown his senior year. You got a handful. The transfer from Virginia that was a receiver, can't remember his name, diminutive guy, that Billy Kemp. He was a good returner at Virginia, but somehow wasn't here.
He was great at fair catching at Nebraska.
Oh, well, that's all they're asked to do, right?
Yeah, all of this starts at the top. You either want to be good at special teams or you're not. And that starts the special teams falls into the lap of the head coach.
Yeah. You had mentioned
like that the head coach directs strength and conditioning. Like, hey, this is what I want the offensive linemen to look like. I want them to run, do this, have flexibility. The head coach has a lot of say, and this is what I believe my philosophy is on our coverage and what we do. That's what I really want. So special teams starts at the top, and you either want to be good or you don't. I should say nobody wants to say, no, I don't want to be really good in special teams, but how much of an emphasis do you place on it is probably the best way to describe it.
And as you look at the final four teams in the college football playoff, Gary, all of them, I think, had solid special teams. Mm-hmm. Those were not detractors for any of those teams. But generally speaking, whenever you look at the college football playoff, what do those teams have that Nebraska currently lacks?
Across the board or in special teams?
Across the board.
I think they are defensively. I think that's a big thing. Run the ball, stop the run, be good on special teams. But I think if you look across the board, those are four pretty good defensive teams, not only with their scheme and choosing like Al Golden. Al Golden has dialed up some pretty good games, but they also have dudes. I mean, wouldn't you love to have an Abdul Carter?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to have a Sawyer? I mean, they have good schemes, but they also have some fellas that are better ball hawkers that make plays.
Which I think, to your point, Elijah, and it gets back to something Gary was talking about earlier, but it's explosiveness at a few key spots, right? I think that was why it was so impressive. Once Emmett kind of took over down the stretch, it was like he broke tackles. He made a guy miss. Wow. You were so not used to seeing that. So having explosion being able to break tackles, being able to make big plays, and then defensively being able to make those splash impact kind of plays with just explosive moves off the edge. To me, that's what's lacking. And to get back to what you were saying, Gary, about strength and conditioning, let's think back, and this is probably going to be the only podcast, especially on a Saturday morning, that is going to break down the effectiveness of different strength and conditioning coaches. But here we go. If we travel all the way back a while,
Boyd Epley.
Let's do that. Since him, the top strength and conditioning coach that Nebraska has had, one guy that comes to mind for me where I think Nebraska's, they didn't necessarily have the depth for it, but I thought some of Bo's teams physically looked the best that Nebraska has looked under Dobson. If you remember like a Nunwa freak show, right? He looked like one of those Oklahoma State receivers that, when they're pumping first rounders into the NFL year after year. He looked like one of those guys. Abdullah was obviously in incredible shape. You think about Sue, the most underappreciated thing about Sue was just his level of conditioning. Yeah. I mean, that dude could play every single freaking snap in the middle of the field. So could Crick. So could all those guys. They all did against Texas. I think you have to go back to Dobson as kind of being when Nebraska physically just looked the best that they have looked over the past. God, you have to go way back. Is there someone I'm missing?
No, I would agree with that. And I think we have to be cautious here. We're four guys on the radio that are dabbling into strength and conditioning. And it's uncomfortable for me because
I'm going to the gym later, man.
I don't know enough about it, but I've asked strength and conditioning coaches at Nebraska just to give me layman's terms on how this all works. A lot of it, guys, starts with the direction of the head coach. Mm-hmm. We look at a strength and conditioning coach, and we look at the team and go, man, that guy is it's the direction of the head coach. The whole BS of guys who didn't want to lift and they didn't show up for lifting back in the Riley era. And, Mark Phillip, who was highly acclaimed when he got here. You remember coming from USC, he was Riley's strength and conditioning coach. I'll never forget. He pulled up to the final game at Memorial Stadium, the game against Iowa in 2017. His car was packed full of his stuff. He'd already moved out of his place. So the game ends. He walks out of the stadium, stops by his office, does whatever he has to do, walks out the stadium, gets in his car, and no one's heard from him since. Just a little side note. But what I've been told is by strength and conditioning coaches that I know that I've asked down there is a lot of the direction comes from the top. Hey, I want my guys to do this. I want them to be agile. I want them to be able to move vertically, horizontally, all of that stuff. So the strength and conditioning coach is taking the lead of the head coach, and then they're implementing their style. So, I think in Bo's situation, Bo was around coming up, whether he played at Ohio State or when he was briefly at Iowa, they always had good strength and conditioning programs. And so he was around that. So he knew kind of what he wanted and what worked.
It's interesting too, because nutrition plays into it, and every single one of the strength and conditioning coaches works those guys, right? Like football players work out more than any outside of bodybuilders.
The amount of training you got to put in to play 14 games or 18 games now is nuts.
And they're all busting their ass, but
and they've made, Nebraska's made a huge investment in that area. And look at the technology in the new facility. So they're in a good spot. I think what has happened in the first 2 years, I think that Corey Campbell had some challenges when he got here, and they have made guys look good in the mirror. Now I think they need to take the step where guys they are ox strong and they're faster. And that's why I'm excited about the defense, because it's not only some of the guys that are arriving, but guys that have been here for now 2 years that maybe haven't hit the field yet because there's been older guys in front of them. That defense is going to fly. I mean, it's not going to be the bulky defense. I'm not saying that Ty Robinson can't go out and run a 4.3 40. Well, yeah, I am. But they're going to have guys that can move laterally, that can move vertically, and that can cover in space and have speed to keep up with wide receivers. So that's what I'm excited on that side of the ball. And then you look on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, we'd all love to have Ja'Cory Barney speed. And I think you got guys that you've added to that wide receiver room that are like, whoa, I'd like to see a foot race. So in that
And then
aspect, I think they're going to be
actions.
better. I think Nebraska has to become stronger, not just natural strong. I think they need to become stronger across the board.
Sharpie, I want to one more thing before we get you out. Gary Sharp with us. Husker hoops.
So adorable of you, Chris.
I want to go there for 2
Wait a minute,
seconds.
I thought Kraynak, have you one second? Kraynak, have you started to hang the banner, the off-season banner yet?
For Nebraska winning the all-season national championship?
I don't see it in your study there.
It's not. I don't have it yet.
Okay.
I think that closes after spring ball.
What's the plant behind you there?
That is a
marijuana.
Bamboo tree?
No, it's like
ficus.
It's called like Dracania. I think it's called Dracania or something like that. It's like one of those like palm kind of looking things, and it grows all scraggly if you're not careful. And
one thing I thought of well, Mark was describing the tree, and I'm not sure what the connection is here.
Yeah, me either.
Cortez Mills and Christian Jones play today on Peacock on NBC. By the way,
that'll be great.
By the way, physically, Christian Jones is as put together of a incoming freshman as you're ever going to have. I mean, the guy's.
Yeah. I've said this for a couple of weeks now. It is. It is.
No.
Hey, does that tree grow blue chews?
Patrick
haven't
is
seen it
ready
yet.
to grab a bottle of whiskey and a firearm.
Hey, speaking of Christian Jones and Dawson Merritt, isn't it good to be Rob Dvorak?
He's good, man.
You're the linebacker coach at Nebraska, and you're already highly thought of, and you've just been given some guys to mold that come in, and you're like, damn, that guy might be ready-made. And then you add some of the guys they've added in the portal out of linebacker. We might go, guys. The biggest transformation in a month at Nebraska might be the linebacker room from going, oh Jesus, to all right, they could be cooking with some peanut oil.
When you look at Nebraska's portal pickups here quickly, Gary, and you just sparked something in me, because I think when you look at the portal pickups, it might set up for Dawson Merritt to play pretty early in his Husker career. I wonder about that. Are there any other places where you look where you think Nebraska might think they have something in an incoming freshman just based on what the portal pickups look like? Because Merritt's one I circle because they haven't gone as hard at edge rusher as you would think outside of Winery. It makes me think maybe they think they're going to get Dawson Merritt on the field pretty early.
I could see that. And I think you'd be disappointed if he wasn't on the field early. You know, and it's crazy. We're going to have to change our conversation because I think we're just going to have to say 105 guys are going to have to get on the field early in their career. But he's a guy, you know, I mean, he's the kind of guy, I think as I look at the high school recruiting class, there's a couple of more guys that they keep adding now into the third round of rules recruiting that look more ready-made to play in college football. Like they don't look like, okay, he's a guy that you're going to have to sit for a bit because red shirts are out the window. We're not doing red shirts anymore. You look and you go, you like that guy's played in a good program. He's got good DNA. I mean, their football IQ, by the way, in this recruiting class is pretty damn good. If you look at my dad was a coach or my dad was a high-level player, they just have more guys that I look at on film and go, okay, that guy, he's going to need to get into the strength and conditioning and get coached up. But boy, he looks like you could put him on the field and he would fit in at least. And Dawson Merritt is one of those. I'm absolutely in agreement, Elijah.
Another one here that from Eric, he says Jamarian Parker at running back thinks might be able to get on the field early. And then Juan says, doesn't matter who's coming in the portal. Cortez Mills is playing.
Yeah. Wide receiver and DBs in the spring are going to be fun to watch.
For sure.
Is there any concern about Rule's original message, both to fans and kind of internally? I'm just how he's playing this with being developmental, with, hey, 1% better, with, hey, be patient. And, he's kind of wanted to take that slower build approach. Yet at the same time, I mean, you have 30 portal visitors. I'm just, are we happy with the adjustments that he's making? Because to me, it seems like he's playing the game. I think that was his plan coming in a couple of years ago, but I think it's now looking at the reality of, like, bottom line is it's a transactional world right now. because there is nobody overseeing. Like there is just a fundamental difference between players' best interests and coaches' best interests right now. Just period. And I don't think he could have predicted how wild it was going to be in the NIL world, to where it's just like everybody's on a 1-year contract basically now. If that. It's not even a 1-year contract. I mean, it's almost like a month-to-month situation. To where I'm not saying you don't develop, but I think it takes a special kid to believe in that and to just be willing to do it. And in the meantime, you got to go shopping every single year. Period.
So let me
bring in
guys.
No, as I say, this is way off the beaten path, but Bill McCartney passed away last night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me respond to Mark, and then we also lost close to you guys, somebody as well. Do you think so? I agree with where you're going, Mark. But at the end of the day, however they're constructing this roster, Nebraska has to win next year. I don't care if they have the 3 of us in the program and they coach us up. They got to coach themselves into options, because they got to win football games in the fall. There's no more of this BS 7 and 6 crap. You can't go back. You can't take a step back. Do you think that in the world of the risk and the reward of high school classes, which maybe Nebraska goes with smaller high school classes moving forward and larger portal classes, that the guys that have 2 or 3 years left that they're getting out of the portal, they almost in a weird way look at them as high school players, because they have a runway to develop them. They're always going to need that 1-year guy that 1-year guy comes in and he's going to be a starter. And Nebraska could have 8 or 9 guys out of this portal class that start on opening day. But do you think that because Rule likes the 2 and 3 year guys out of the portal, that have 2 or 3 years left, that maybe they start looking at, well, maybe that's our high school recruiting, because now the clock is ticking. We got those 2 years or those 3 years, which is essentially the same as those high school players that have 2 years and hopefully maybe a third.
Probably. And if you think about it from a player's point of view now, the game now, secure a scholarship out of high school, go train somewhere, see how you like it. If you don't, bounce. Right. But it's really just secure that scholarship out of high school is really all you have to worry about at this point. And there is no long-term. It is too transactional with coaches leaving. I mean, look at Stephon Thompson, who has just been following, Tony White, for instance, Syracuse, Nebraska. Now he's going to Florida State. It's, coaches come and go. The playing field has been leveled. That makes it really difficult. It is more difficult now, I believe, on coaching staffs than it has ever been, in terms of, because all the things that you fundamentally believe about team building, and about the long game and about continuity on the offensive line and all these kind of axioms that we have all just totally bought into are kind of all gone. I mean, think about with offensive line. You're on the cusp here. You got 1 tackle, and you're on the cusp of maybe bringing in another from New Mexico State. What's this about continuity on the offensive line?
What has shifted is the reality. We were talking with Coach Barney about that this week, and you got to kind of change our way of thinking, where you would recruit 4 to 5 guys every year and build up your war chest of offensive linemen, where you got 20 in the room to find 5 that can hopefully stay healthy for you for 12 games. No, you don't have to go as deep with it's not a strength in numbers anymore. It's let's go find 7 where there's 5 that are really, really good because of this roster deal.
Yeah. I mean, it's NFL light. You have the draft, which is your high school recruiting, and then you have free agency. Back to what you mentioned, Smitty. We all kind of have in the Nebraska fan base the hate relationship with Bill McCartney, maybe a little bit of love. The 30 for 30
was great,
which did not put Nebraska in a good light. But, we know when McCartney was at Colorado, what he did to that rivalry. Yeah. It is a very underrated 30 for 30, in my opinion. But I also want to mention somebody else, and this is locally, and especially in the building that Schmidt and Elijah go to every day. We lost a guy that early in my broadcasting career, and I know the same exact way with you, Schmidt, Chuck Stevens passed away.
Yep.
And Chuck was an institution at KFOR, and he was even more so doing high school games in Nebraska Wesleyan. And a friend of mine, a mutual friend of all of ours, reached out and he said, "Hey, did you hear that Chuck had passed away? I know he'd been battling some dementia, but I just want to bring that up because if you lived in Lincoln and you were playing high school sports or you listened to KFOR, Chuck Stevens was like your soundtrack. Great person, huge heart, loved high school sports. Him and Ward Jacobson would do the games. And then he was the voice of Nebraska Wesleyan for a long time. So that was a little gut punch hearing that the other day.
Big time gut punch yesterday. Got the news, and we love Chuck, and he was so good to me, so good to many of us. And him and Ward were incredible, and they did phenomenal coverage in Nebraska too before it became the Husker Network.
Yeah,
every local station had a chance if they wanted to have your own Husker broadcast, and this goes back years. But no, Chuck took care of me, man. Chuck took care of me when I first started. Chuck took care of me when I moved away. Chuck took care of me when I moved back, and Chuck took care of you with some ups and downs in this industry. He was there for you, and his family's the best, has always been the best, and he was the best. So no, I love him. I just smile when I think about him. So
well, and there's two types of folk, and I didn't know him well, but like Gary was saying, listened to him plenty and ran into him a few times. And there's kind of two types of people in broadcasting in some ways, like the ones that are, kind of circle the wagon, stay the hell away, zero-sum game. There can only be one winner types. And then there are the types that are just like, no, I'm going to mentor, I'm going to help, I'm going to support, I'm going to try to elevate the people around. He was that guy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because when you achieve kind of his status, you could very well just kind of, be a little nervous about the up and coming guys and want to keep them away. Or you can embrace him and be like, try to help him out. And that's definitely what he did, which is awesome.
They still have the KFOR Sportscasters Club, don't they?
We do.
Okay, so that was Chuck's baby.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Chuck was, man, he was so good on air, and Chuck was so good in the office. What I mean by that is we're gonna sit down and you're gonna sign a deal here. You're gonna love the deal.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna go play some golf.
Yeah. And listen, $8.50 an hour might not sound great, but when you consider that you're gonna work 50.
No, I'm talking
what's the overtime.
He was a sales guy. He was a great sales guy.
I'm talking the on air and then the salesmanship.
Got
was
it.
Just glorious. It was so good. They're so funny too, where Ward would pull a prank. They'd be on the road for the Nebraska Wesleyan games, and Ward would start rolling tape, and Chuck would be snoring, dude, snoring. We're talking freight train.
That's my guy.
Snoring away, and then they'd run it back on the morning show. So,
ouch!
Yeah,
perfect. It's just a little background. That's good.
Yeah.
Well,
hey,
let it be known really fast here. I didn't know Chuck, but I know everyone around here in this building knew Chuck and was impacted by Chuck. So when it's all said and done, it's not about what you accomplish; it's about who you impact. And Chuck Stevens is one of those guys that impacted a lot of people in local broadcasting.
Yeah. You don't hear a lot of people. I haven't heard anybody talk mess about him, right? Like it's just you don't.
He was.
I've never heard bad words about the guy.
I began my career at KLIN across town, and so I was competing, and we didn't have KLIN did not have the Huskers yet, and I think they were on KFOR. I think when Broadcast House got the Huskers, they were on KFOR and got them in the mid '90s. But we all did high school games, and so we would cross paths a lot. And he was, and it was always us that had technical issues, and Chuck was always there to give a helping hand. Even though we're supposed to be competition, he didn't see it as competition. He saw it as, man, we're putting high school football and basketball on the radio. And he was, I mean, throughout my career, whenever I've seen him, He always had a smile. He'd always tell you a story. But man, he loved radio, and that's a big loss in our industry because he's one of the giants in Lincoln broadcasting.
Yeah. No, he is, and the thing that I will always be thankful for is not only the time and the patience, but the fact that you're waiting for the ceiling to come down on you. We're talking belt to ass. Oops, you left some equipment somewhere your first year, right? Back in the day, there was this freaking antenna we had to haul everywhere.
Are you talking about, did you have a Marty? Is that what it was?
I had some
Marty
unit that was a makeshift where it's, I mean,
do you know what a Marty is? Do you think our listeners know what a Marty is? It was Can you imagine they never made us sign waivers either?
It's a fire hazard.
It's true.
That you plug in, you turn on, and then you pray that the reception will work, and then you stick this freaking box.
And like you can't touch it, right?
It'll electrocute the shit out of you. And then you got
I mean, it was like
antenna that is gonna be waving like this, that isn't
like World War I technology.
Yeah. It is. You know? And then oh God, I left it at the Prosh Activity Center. Sorry, Chuck. Well, it'll be okay, Chris. Meanwhile, what thought bubble, what the hell is this kid doing? And he saves your backside when you left equipment that they only had one of, right? That goes back to the 1960s. And he was there to take care of you, and then just made sure that the brass did not crucify you. I mean, I love him, so I miss him. So
by the way,
I'm thankful I got to be with him.
Yeah, it's good stuff about him. Real quick about
one more thing
about Broadcast House back in the day. I was an intern there when Gary was one of the co-hosts of Sports Nightly, and also he was the voice of Lincoln Stars hockey. And so I was intern and like part-time, and I had like the Sunday 6 a.m. shift. May have missed it a couple times. John Bishop probably still hates me because of that. I feel really bad. I was young and dumb. But you think about some of the folks that were there, it's kind of interesting, right? Like Mike Flood he was just a DJ on the country station.
Yeah.
And now he's like,
he's in Washington.
He might be president. And like,
so Mike, so Mike was the afternoon guy on Froggy 98. Yep. And he just wanted to learn how radio worked because he said, someday I'm going to buy radio and TV stations.
And then he did that. And he was good actually too.
We had a run of Jim Rose, John Baylor, Gary Sharp, John Bishop, Jeff Moats, Kraynak was there.
Jack Holmes.
Yeah. It was good back in the day. We tried to hire Schmidt, but we couldn't pull it off.
Yeah.
I had a great time with Chuck. I had a great time with Dolman. I had a great time with John Baylor. I had a great time with Gary. Yeah, we got a good little fraternity. And Kraynak and I go back to college in 1998.
I believe we did a Husker baseball game using a Marty unit.
We did. You were we did one together because we about died with the Marty unit. And two, Ken Harvey hit a ball that still hasn't landed. You had a great call, and I stepped all over that call. And you didn't throw me out of the booth, but you should have. And I still feel bad about that.
I wonder if we can find that tape. I don't know. I wonder if we can find that tape.
I would love to hear young Schmidt on the radio. What did his voice sound like? What did young Schmidt?
I don't like it does now.
I don't think it changed much.
Yeah, it sounded pretty similar. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little more exuberant, maybe. A little less jaded, maybe.
I will pull up the I'll pull up like the 10-year-old interviews that we have here with.
Well, we've got a Bill McCartney interview from the 30 for 30.
Yeah, and like you listen back to those and you go, his voice sounded different. It was the same voice still, but it was different. So
I got a little bit of
sounded younger.
Yeah. I got a little bit of PTSD about playing a recording of anybody that has passed. You remember what we did with Mrs. B at KRNU? So
oh my god.
Right? So we used to conjure up Mrs. B to give picks or something like that during like Mrs. B from Nebraska Furniture Mart fame. Yes. And like if you remember the commercials, it would be like, right now, 25% off all lamps at Nebraska Furniture Mart. And then it'd be like Mrs. B just being like, and like you couldn't understand a damn thing she was saying, right? So we conjure that up. We conjure that up during, you know, right?
Yeah.
So we conjured that up at KRNU. We had like a little bit on our show, and we played that music from, what's the music from? One of the devil movie with Al Pacino.
Devil's Advocate.
Devil's Advocate. You know, where it's like, it's like that, whatever that song is. So we're playing that, the kind of dark, like, whatever song. Playing that, and then like as soon as we play it, like mid-bit, the entire building gets a power outage, and that had never happened. The whole thing shuts off. Everything shuts off right as we conjure her up, and we're looking at each other like, I think we are messing with some levels that we just need to stay the hell away from.
Hey,
that's all.
We got to get out of here because some of us have to go call a college basketball game across the street. To finish,
who they got today?
With
who
Bill,
they got today?
Huge game, Omaha, South Dakota State.
Ooh,
1 o'clock. Yeah, Omaha's 3-0 in the Summit. But back to last night after the semifinal game, it came down that Bill McCartney had passed away. How do you guys think college football will remember Bill McCartney?
I think he'll be remembered as a
interesting legacy, Schmitty. From fifth down to what he did in the Nebraska-Colorado rivalry to, I mean, what was it, Promise Keepers?
Yeah, I mean, I think
he had some dudes.
No, he had some dudes, and he had 14 guys on his staff that ended up being head coaches. And his coaching tree's nuts. I think he is really, really. Guys are thankful for the opportunity, and they were taught how to coach and win. But I think it's tough to work for. I mean, I think he was a really hard coach to work for. But I think the transition to Promise Keepers. I think he honestly looked at the chase, and he said this to us when we interviewed him. It had been 2 weeks after his wife passed away. We didn't know that. And this was 8, 9, 10 years ago with Mac. And we run it once a year because it was that good. It was just wow. He kind of stopped chasing and had a moment in his life where he just said, dude, I'm not doing life right. Winning all the games is great. And, you know, the competition and the obsession to beat Nebraska was what drove me to be great, to be the Big 8 champ, to win a national championship or split a national championship. But then he pumped the brakes and said, man, I got to relook at my priorities, because he retired after the 94 season. You think of that 94 Colorado team, they finished number 2 in the country. Westbrook, Salam, Cordell Stewart. And then he handed off
Hudson. I mean, the 94 Nebraska Colorado game is unbelievable in terms of the
championship. Yeah, I mean, it's great. Yeah. Then he handed off to Neuheisel, where they were top 5 teams for at least 3 years, and then he just totally urinated all over what was built up. But I think McCartney is going to be seen as a character, but a guy that ultimately walked away for bigger things in his life.
Hey, I think Bill McCartney is one of the best things that happened to Nebraska.
Yeah,
because he used Nebraska, and remember, it coincided with the downfall of Oklahoma,
right,
where Nebraska used Colorado to keep them engaged and to keep that somebody was chasing them, and they weren't going to put up with it. And I think both sides used each other. You know, there's some of the think about it, guys. Some of the best wins in Nebraska history that as a fan you remember every intimate detail have come against a Bill McCartney Colorado team. And then some of the worst losses where you remember every intimate detail also came against a Bill McCartney team.
Dude, it was so long ago, but anytime anybody mentions Eric Bieniemy, I just picture touchdown going into the south end zone, right hash. Like immediately, as soon as anybody mentions his name, when they just pulled away in the fourth quarter and Bieniemy was unstoppable and Hagan
5 touchdowns, 4 fumbles, 27 fourth quarter points.
I mean, just right when it all just fell apart. Yeah,
but that was Kenny Walker Senior Day. I mean,
And I think
I love that's what I remember about that game. Freezing in the south end zone front row.
That's the Sal. So that's the game on the 30 for 30 that is referenced about the students that had the bed sheet that they put Sal is dead, go Big Red.
Big Red.
It's 12-0. It was a miserable weather day in 90. It's pouring rain the entire game. It was like dark. It was dark, and you know, it was 12-0, and Nebraska was rolling. And then that friggin' fourth quarter where
Big punt killed him.
And Bieniemy and, you know, Mickey had a little issue that day.
Mickey stepped out of bounds allegedly, that puts the game away.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he steps out of bounds or not on the sideline. And then
you got Hagan and Bieniemy are celebrating. They're taking off their helmets, running around the field. People had oranges. It was great. It was also, remember, the stuff out in Boulder, bad call on a clip. But then what happened? Then 91, people are jacked up, you know, out there, and you get the snowball game with Byron Bennett. Then in 92, it's I hate Colorado with a passion. Oh, and that was Out for Blood on Halloween, another bad weather day. I think Bill McCartney was great for Nebraska because it coincided with that 94 game. I still to this day hear people that tell me that lived like off of 10th Street, but maybe like 20 blocks from the stadium, that they could hear the noise from the stadium when Eric Alford caught the touchdown pass.
2014 Miami was maybe the other game that you could say reached that decibel level, reached that noise level. It was absurd.
That's why Colorado and Nebraska need to be a thing to start the year every year.
And for folks maybe that weren't alive or following Nebraska and Colorado at the time, I think the best kind of comparison, McCartney put together Urban Meyer Florida-like rosters to me, right? He put together, I mean, just dudes at every single position to where when you looked at it on paper, you were like, damn, like, I hope Nebraska can, like, it just looks like first round picks all over the damn field.
Well, that's the
and
thing
Nebraska was a little bit more, I think, like maybe a Saban, Alabama, where it's like definitely some dudes, but it was more, it wasn't this. I don't know. It's hard to think of a comparison for Nebraska, but it's sort of like modern day Ohio State or like late 2000s Florida. That was Colorado.
Well,
Colorado chased every player that Nebraska was recruiting. That was their rabbit.
Yeah.
Nebraska was Clemson
Tommy Frazier
6 years ago, right? That's what I think of.
Clemson.
With
you know the story about Colorado and Tommy Frazier?
Yeah, no. I mean, Colorado pursued Tommy Frazier heavily.
Tommy was committed to Colorado. And then Mac tells Barney, hey, we're changing offenses. Tell him he can play defensive back. We're going after Coy Detmer.
Oh, Coy Detmer. Coy Detmer, by the way, got ritually slayed on the Memorial Stadium turf. He was lit up. And by the way, I wonder if that's something Nebraska – what do you think Nebraska's knock quarterback out of the game rate was in their heyday? Like, I feel like it was a feature of – I would say it happened more games than it didn't when Nebraska was rolling, where the starting quarterback on the other team did not finish the game. Like, that seemed to happen with regularity, and that has been a little while. If Nebraska could get back to that, that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic.
Seems like a fitting way to end this show, huh?
Yeah.
Sharpie, be good. Have a hell of a call today.
Hey, guys, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. We'll see what happens tomorrow at Mackey for Nebraska basketball.
No kidding.
11 a.m. I'll give him a chance.
We'll rock an Average Joe sports show Sunday live tomorrow at 10:30. It's a shameless plug. Sharpie, be good.
Thanks, guys.
Mark Kraynak may make an appearance. Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. Thanks for tuning into the weekend edition of Hail Varsity. Like and subscribe. Hail Varsity YouTube, Hail Varsity Radio, Twitter, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Give us a rating and tell us what you think when you search Hail Varsity Radio. Talk to you next time. Thanks.